Just a reminder that Gabe and I are patients with lived experience. We are not doctors. We are not psychiatrists. We are just here sharing the best we can with things that we've experienced and been through.
Don't sue us.
Don't sue us.
We don't have
please.
money or insurance.
Hey there, guys. Welcome to the video. I'm here talking with Gabe Howard. We are going to be doing this video about caregivers and how they can best help someone they love or they know who might be struggling with mental illness. So you guys know me. My name's Cody. I live with schizophrenia. This is Gabe. He lives with bipolar disorder. I'm going to let him do a little intro on himself, and then we're going to get into the topic.
Hey, Cody's fan base. My name is Gabe Howard. I live with bipolar disorder. I wrote the book Mental Illness is an Asshole, and I host the podcast Inside Bipolar for Healthline Media. Been a mental health advocate for, as Cody likes to point out, a long time.
Yeah.
Cody, thanks for doing this. I think it's going to be very impactful.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason this came about was because we both do motivational speaking. We both are at conferences all the time. We talk to patients all the time. We talk to caregivers all of the time. And me and Gabe had a moment of realization where we discussed that every time we do a speech, every time we talk to an audience, inevitably, after we're done, a line will form, and most of the people in that line that want to talk to us are people that have a son, a brother, a sister, a mom, a dad, someone in their life living with severe mental illness. And the wonderful thing is people want to know how they can help. And, you know, growing up with a mom who had schizophrenia and you being someone who was doing mental health advocacy before it was a popular conversation, we know that this is a good thing, right? And so we can't help every individual person because every experience is going to be individualized, but we thought we could give you guys some tips for what helped us on our journeys and just general advice that we do give people when they ask us, hey, Gabe, how do I help someone living with bipolar disorder? How do I help my mom who's struggling and not taking her medication? Stuff like that. So we're going to go back and forth here, but I'd love to start with you. Just what's some basic starting advice for people that come up to you and they say, I have a brother who lives with bipolar disorder. How can I help him better?
So the first thing that I always tell everybody, and it's sort of like the level setting expectation, is to recognize that your impact is going to be really low. And I think that's important because where you can be very impactful is being supportive and to care for yourself and to be around and to be involved and to just keep yourself healthy so that you can be in this for the long run.
Yeah.
But of course, when people ask us this question, they want the magic bullet. They want, if I do X, my loved one will be well. They will be like you, or they will reach recovery, or all of their problems will fall away. And I want to let people, that's not reasonable.
Yeah.
Hard stop, that's not reasonable. If there was a magic cure, I would have already sold it. Cody wouldn't be a content creator because it would have just been solved.
Yeah.
Cody and I would be accountants, probably working in middle management somewhere. And I say that both to add a little bit of humor because it's so tough,
Yeah.
but also because I think that sometimes loved ones feel like if they would only do something, they would save their loved one. And that is unreasonable.
Yeah.
And I really need people to know that. So I wanted to just start right there.
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of ideas to try, hints, tips, and your mileage may vary. But if you think that you can solve this and you can do it, you're setting yourself up to be incredibly disappointed.
No, and I would say that that's very similar to what I tell people. I also really try to make sure people understand it is an individualized experience. Everyone is going to have different journeys. Everyone's going to have different medication that works for them or doesn't work for them. Everyone is going through, despite the similarities between mental illness, even like people with my same diagnosis, there's a lot of factors that are going to be different from individual to individual. So one is, do they have supportive family? And I love that people come up and ask us this because then I know right away, at least they have someone who wants them to be doing better. Now, as you said, the downside of that is there isn't a magic switch. There isn't something that is going to 100% work all of the time. But I do know, like I am not only a patient, I am a caregiver for my mother with schizophrenia. So fortunately, I have experience both as a patient and caregiver. And that has really allowed me to give some like really general advice, try to help people better understand their role as a caregiver, and then also help them realize that the person that they love or the person that they want to help with schizophrenia or bipolar or whatever the mental illness is, they might not even recognize that they need help. And so for me, my first piece of advice is always find out where they're at, because if they're not ready to receive help, you have a lot more work ahead of you. If there's someone who, you know, they didn't realize that there was help out there, and giving them that information lets them, you know, access it, and awesome, amazing. Unfortunately, that's not usually the case, because most people know that there are resources out there. So if they're not asking for it, they're not seeking them, they probably aren't in a stage where they're ready for them.
One of the hardest things to tell family members is that they can't do it for them.
Exactly.
Especially when you're talking to like moms and dads, they're just like, look, I'll do anything. I'll carry any water. I'll walk up any hill. I will take any burden on and I will solve it for my child.
And they mean it too.
And they do.
They do.
And it does not work that way. Yeah. That's just a hard stop moment. So the first thing that I really try to level set, which is your loved one has to do the bulk of the work. It has to be self-directed recovery. They have to make these decisions. They have to buy in. They have to do the work. They have to understand their illness. They have to do almost everything. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't be supportive and helpful, but at the end of the day, I really liken it to when your kid was in school and you're just like, oh my God, I could do their math homework. Yeah. Their math homework would be done in like 30 seconds. I know all the answers to all 10 questions, then we can get on and do something fun. But you know, if you write down those 10 answers that, yeah, they'll get an A, but they won't know how to do addition. Yeah. So you have to sit there for an hour while they're counting on their fingers. But when you're done, they can now do addition as fast as you. Exactly. And that's the way we have to look at this. Even if you know what to do, it's just not going to work. And one of the biggest struggles that people have is, well, can I just make my loved one do it? Can I force them into therapy, force them on medication, force them into treatment? And these things have limited long-term success. They may have short-term success, much in the same way of filling out that addition sheet, that math sheet for your kindergartner will get them an A. Yeah. But, you know, then they get into first grade and they don't know how to do math. It sort of works the same way. It's very analogous. And I think people do need to understand that. Yeah. I also think, you know, what you said is spot on. There are things that people that are caregivers can start to do preemptively. So like, for my example, so one of the reasons I was able to get care pretty quickly was because my mom and my wife, during the several years where I was struggling with not recognizing that I had schizophrenia, struggling with addiction, they were preparing resources for me. And I didn't know that because I didn't think anything was wrong with me. And so once I did finally reach out for help, and I didn't think I had schizophrenia, I just was able to recognize like, hey, I can't do what everyone else can do. I can't hold a job. I wasn't able to get through a single day without some sort of substance. And so even though I didn't recognize that I was having hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, when I reached out for help, they had already organized like, hey, we have a doctor you can go meet with, a psychiatrist you can get referred to. There's peer support groups in your area. They had resources ready. And that, you know, we talk about early intervention. To me, that is how a caregiver or someone can be ready to help with early intervention, because we can only do so much to help guide our loved ones into the and I'm saying this not only as a patient, but as someone who watched a family member go through it. So that's why I love that I have, obviously it's not great that I have the experience of being a caregiver and a patient, but if I had one, I'm glad I have the other, you know, because caregivers will come up to me and they're like so frustrated. They're like, why can't I just have them do this, you know? And they're like, you are so well now and you're doing really well and medication is working for you. Why can't I get them to do this? And I'm like, hey, I want you to know that before I was me and before I got stable, I was a caregiver who had to watch my own mother struggle with no diagnosis, no medication. And I was a kid. Like, as much as I was a caregiver, she's still the adult. She was the parent. She was in charge. And so what am I supposed to do? I can't force her to go do anything. We're very fortunate that, you know, she had that maternal instinct to seek help. And it didn't happen right away. And even when she started looking for help, it took so long for her to actually get that help. So that's usually my first tip, is start preparing resources for when they do reach out to you. But I know you have something where you also acknowledge that, hey,
they might not reach out to you. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, so I want to talk about a few things. So one, you're absolutely right. There's nothing worse than dropping the ball at the line.
Yeah.
Right, where your loved one comes up to you and they're finally like, I'm ready, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'll find out and get back to you.
Yeah.
Right, you want to be ready right in the moment.
Because if you don't get it might be too late.
Right. By the time you find it, they may have lost interest. So you want to be ready to go right away, which I do want to acknowledge just real quick as an aside can be difficult in our current system.
Oh, 100%.
Because you might make that appointment when they're ready, but it could be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks before they actually get to the appointment. And by then they've moved on. Yeah. So, but keeping this optimistic, and that's what I want to do. I want to think best case and optimistic. Again, your mileage may vary. But one of the things that I think about is there are so many barriers to care. And you want to make sure as a caregiver, as a loved one, as a friend, as a parent, as a whatever, you are not one of them. And here's the biggest problem, Cody. They don't realize they're a barrier because they miss something. Right? People, caregivers, loved ones, friends, they miss something all the time. They're constantly saying, you need a doctor, you need to go to therapy, you need to do it. And they don't realize that what they're actually doing is forcing their loved one into a situation where now they have to admit that they're sick and they have to admit that they were wrong.
Yeah.
Look, forget about mental illness for a moment. Everybody in America struggles to admit when they make a mistake.
100%.
And we really struggle to admit when we're wrong to our loved ones, especially our parents. Mm-hmm. So now I've got to admit that I'm sick and I had to admit that you were right all along. That's a barrier. Don't do that. Set yourself up as a partner. Say things like, I'm gonna pretend that I am your caregiver.
Yeah.
I am your friend, Cody. And I'm gonna say something like, look, I've just really noticed, Dean, that you have been struggling. Yeah. And I got to tell you, it's weighing on me, buddy. You know, I go to work and I'm worried that when I come home, you're not going to be okay. I think about you all the time. Whenever I call you and you don't answer the phone, I'm just terrified. And can you go to therapy for me? Like, I'll go with you. We'll drive. We'll make a day of it. I'll arrange it. Hell, I'll even pay the copay. But I'm not getting through my day because I'm just terrified for you. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, Cody thinks to himself, Gabe is overreacting, but I'll go. Yeah. Or Gabe is wrong, but I mean, I don't want to make Gabe suffer. If Cody sees it as a favor for Gabe, my odds of Cody doing it go up much more dramatically than this scenario. Cody, you're a train wreck. Your life is a mess. You need to get help right now. Go see somebody. Yeah. What's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? Why you want to live this way? Just go get help.
Look at your life. Hard.
Look at you, man.
I heard that a lot. Look at your life.
Yeah. And then we start throwing up other barriers, right? Let's just pull the rug out from under our family members right now. Why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like your sister? Remember 2 years ago when you excelled? Why can't you be more like that? Yeah. Why, you know our church ladies, neighbors, brothers, sisters, friends, cousin? He's a doctor. Yeah. Why can't you do any of that? And we say this because we're frustrated. Yeah. Like we say it because we're just desperately throwing spaghetti at the wall and we're trying to get stuff to stick, and stuff is sticking. The negativity, the hostility, and more and more and more and more barriers. Yeah. And I want to, and some people listening, some people watching, they're going to think, I've done that. Mm-hmm. Now what do I do? How do I back away from it? And the answer might be you can't. The answer might be you can't back away from it. And this is some of the hardest advice that I give. Sometimes what you have to do is outsource. Mm-hmm. You have to find the sibling that they're close to.
Someone they're still in good terms with.
The favorite aunt or uncle, the favorite grandma or grandpa, hell, maybe even their buddy. You know, maybe call Cody's friend and be like, hey, I'm Cody's dad and Cody's not doing well and he listens to you. Please, God, will you talk to him and here's some advice? Yeah. And let them watch this. And you're thinking that's so hard. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, and this is there's a lesson in here. Some people listening to like, you know how hard it is to admit that my son or my daughter or my friend or my loved one has a problem to another person. You know how hard that's going to be? Gabe, this advice isn't good. I got to disclose to another person that my loved one is struggling. Right. But you want your loved one to confess to a stranger that they're struggling and you think they're stupid for not doing it. Yeah. And again, that's as plain as I can put it. Yeah. If you think it's difficult to ask for help on behalf of your loved one, imagine how difficult it is for your loved one to ask for help with a compromised brain.
Especially if they haven't been able to admit to themselves that they're struggling. And there's a whole nother, attached to what you just said, paranoia. People with mental illness often have paranoia. And what I realized was the people who were adamant about helping me became a part of my paranoia at some point.
Yeah. The closer you are to somebody, the more likely they are to be involved in your psychosis, your delusion, your whatever, your mental illness, because they're there.
Yeah. in addition to that, on top of like a person already struggling with paranoia, this is a really interesting topic because, and maybe you'll talk a little bit about this, but you, when you were told you were struggling, didn't believe it, and you went in for someone else, right?
Yeah, I was tricked. I'm trying to talk as plainly as possible. I was 100% tricked. I did not think anything was wrong with me. I did not think I was sick, and I was in a car heading to an emergency room, literally to win a bet. Because the person realized that I was suicidal, delusional, psychosis. I mean, the person who was driving me to the hospital was like, yeah, I know exactly what's wrong with this guy. And she was 100% right. But when she just plainly explained it to me, I thought she was nuts.
Yeah.
I honestly thought she was insane. I thought I am dealing with a crazy person. But she bet me dinner, Cody. She was like, I bet you dinner that this is where you need to go. And the way that you win this argument is we'll go to the hospital and we'll ask the doctor, and the doctor will declare a winner. If you're right, Gabe, I will take you to dinner anywhere you want in the city.
Deal.
So that's what I said. I said, sure.
Yeah.
Why not? And that is how I walked into an emergency room. And that's how I got my first psych evaluation. And that's how I was committed to a psychiatric hospital, where I was told that something was very wrong and received my first psychiatric treatments, etc. If I had not been tricked, I would not have been evaluated. If I would have been evaluated, I would have been committed. If I wasn't committed, I wouldn't have been stabilized on psychiatric medications. If I wasn't stabilized on psychiatric medications, peer support, therapy, coping skills, lived experience wouldn't have come into play. So that first domino, Cody, domino was a lie. It was a straight up hardcore lie. She knew damn well that I was going to be admitted if I walked into an ER. But she didn't say that. She said, hey, I'll buy you dinner if you're right and I'm wrong. And I was like, hey, I think you're wrong.
And the advice you gave, I mean, that's literally what she did. So you're like, now you can like utilize that to try to point out to other people like, hey, this is one way that you might be able to have this conversation. I think another topic that, we always get is people will have friends or family members who they got into psychiatric care, they got in past their first appointment, but now they don't want to take their meds. This is one I get all the time. And I think it's an important part of this conversation about how to help a loved one, because a lot of people with psychiatric disorders, as much as I wish this wasn't true, do need medication. I didn't want that to be true when I took it. I know that I fought tooth and nail to not take medication. And now I'm very grateful for it. It's what gives me my stability. But I hear this one all the time. And I don't necessarily have any do this. I just have a lot of little tips. I always found success with my friends and family trying to remind me of hey, Cody, when you didn't take medication, how did you feel? What were you going through? What did your life look like versus where it is now? I don't know if you have additional tips, but for me, it was just a lot of remembering where I came from and why I started medication in the first place. Because I think a lot of people with psychiatric disorders start medication, and even if it's working really well, they suddenly think, well, I'm doing well. I don't need medication anymore. And I hear this so often, and it often leads to relapse. It leads to people falling out of meds, or like me, quitting meds and going back to addiction as a form of self-medicating. So I don't know if you have more tips for that, but that's usually what I explain to people. Is it's a lot of reliving what I went through.
Cody, how much time do you got? I have so much to say on medication, but here's where I'm going to start. Whenever somebody who is taking psychiatric medication says they don't want to take their psychiatric medication anymore, the first thing that all the friends, family members, support, caregivers say is, it's for your own good, take it. Yeah. That's the first words out of their mouth 98% of the time. Nobody ever says, why not?
Yeah.
Why don't you want to take these meds? Because I got to tell you, the reasons could be extraordinarily valid.
Yeah.
And because that never gets addressed, they realize you're not an ally. All people seem to be interested in is med compliant. But listen to this, Cody, and I'm going to be a real big smartass for a moment.
Shocker.
Yeah, I know. If a psychiatrist prescribed every single person with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis, mental illness in this country 1 M&M a day, and every single person with mental illness took that 1 M&M, they would be med compliant.
Yeah.
So therefore, this problem would be resolved. And you're thinking to yourself, that doesn't make any sense. M&Ms don't do anything for mental illness. Right. And not all medications do something for mental illness as well in an individual person. Mm-hmm. So The med compliant conversation is an incredibly narrow conversation because compliance isn't actually what we need.
Yeah.
What we need is compliance on the correct medication.
Yeah.
So many people with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, psychosis, and severe and persistent mental illness, the reason they don't want to take their medication is actually very valid. They have sexual side effects. They have weight gain. They feel brain fog. They can't think straight. They're sleeping 20 hours a day. They're unable to concentrate. They're unable to read. They have a chronic shakes, dry mouth. The side effect profile is it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And when they say, I don't want to take this medication anymore, and you say, why not? And they say, because I'm sleeping 20 hours a day, you should say, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That is unacceptable. You're right. I need to be your advocate to find you medication that will both alleviate the symptoms of your illness and allow you to thrive.
Yeah.
And that's not the conversation we're having. Everybody is just like, don't quit.
Yeah.
They panic.
Yeah.
It's a trauma response from the caregivers, the family, the friends, and don't quit. And nobody's bothering to ask why. And that is a critical error that is almost impossible to get over because now your loved one knows not to come to you about medication. Mm-hmm. So then they just stop taking it and lie to you because they know you're not going to be supportive. They know you're not going to be understanding. And they know that you are petrified and frankly terrified that they're going to stop. So you're not a resource anymore.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're left to their own devices and you're left guessing. Did they or did they not take them? And if we want to build on it from there, that's where we get annoying questions like, did you take your meds today? Look, I'm struggling and I'm trying to make it. I don't need to wake up every morning and every time I do something you don't like, you ask me if I took my pills today.
Yeah.
Like that's not a relationship. That's a cage that I'm now trapped in. I see this fall apart in almost every family in America, and it's such a shame because both sides are right.
Yeah.
The people taking the medication have valid reasons for not wanting to take it. And the people who don't want them to go off of it have valid reasons to not want them to go off of it.
Absolutely.
And they don't realize that they need to work together to get to the promised land, which is med compliance on medication that alleviates the symptoms and allows them to thrive. That's the actual goal. But that's not the goal people are working on.
It also is not an overnight thing.
Oh,
like this
my
is
God.
we're talking I think people get really discouraged because they don't realize, and we can talk about this both, but I spent 5 or 6 years finding the right medication. Like 5 or 6 years. People see Cody before he was diagnosed. People get to see Cody now on social media doing super well. No one saw, besides my wife and my doctor, no one saw Cody for that 5 or 6 years trying a med. It didn't work. You know what helped? I had support not only from my wife and mom, but I had very good open communication with my psychiatrist, and she made me feel very involved with my own care. And you know what that did? Made me feel like I had control over something for the first time since my diagnosis. For the first time since I started having symptoms and I lost everything. I didn't have, I couldn't go to school. I wasn't able to work. I couldn't drive. And finally, I had control of something. And it was my medication. But to me, that was huge because it was like, I'm a part of this care. This is something I can control. If I don't like it, they're going to listen to me and we can try something new. And it took a lot of different meds. It took a lot of different mixtures. And it finally led to a point of stability that not only did I never think I would have, but the people in my life, I don't think ever thought I could have a conversation like this, be so articulate ever again, be able to express my emotions. Like that was out of the realm of possibility for me at one point in my journey. And I think you have a stat that you talk about that I steal all the time now.
Thief.
But if you want to talk about it here quickly, it's about psychiatric medication, and I use this all the time now because when you said it, it blew my mind. I'm like, yes, that is the perfect way to explain this because it is frustrating, both as a patient and a caregiver, to see the person you love finally taking the step to ask for help and then it not working.
Yeah, so there's so much to say about what we believe about medication in this country.
Let me start by doing this. Ready? Gabe, my son has tried every medication. What do I do?
You've tried every medication?
Every medication.
There are over 300 psychiatric medications, and most people are on a cocktail. So if your son is on 3 medications and 300, this comes out to millions of combinations.
What?
And we get to billions of combinations when we consider that every drug has multiple dosages.
And I mean, is the
and
300
on and on and on. Yeah.
and the 300 is that counting generics too?
It's not counting generics.
Okay, yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean, it's the reality is that there's more combinations than any human can try in their lifetime, and I feel that people give up too quick. There's so much to discuss with medication, Cody, sincerely, and I want to get it all out in some order that makes sense. So the first thing that I want to say is whenever people have said, I've tried everything, you haven't. Hard stop. It's impossible. Nobody can try everything. That's the first thing. The second thing that I want to say when people say, well, I feel like my doctor is just guessing, they are. It's an educated guess.
Yep.
It's a guess that is informed by experience, et cetera, but you are right. It is observational. So you have to do your part to add to that guessing, right? And
you need
that
to be open and honest and give them all the information.
Sharing everything you have, no matter how mundane it is.
Or embarrassing.
Yeah, or embarrassing. The next thing is, and I see people screw this up all the time, they will start taking medication and then they will stop, but they don't want to admit it. So they won't tell their doctor. Well, now every single decision that your doctor makes, they think you're on that medication. You're not on that medication. So everything that they come up with after that is going to be wrong 100% of the time because they believe you're taking the medication that you secretly stopped. And I want to hand it to the patient. They stopped taking it because they couldn't have sex anymore, or because it fogged their brain, or because it gave them a tremor so bad they couldn't draw, and drawing's the only place where they're ever happy.
Yeah.
So I understand why they did it, but then because they were fear of repercussions, their family being mad, their doctor throwing them out, being called uncaring or names or just whatever, they don't admit to it. And that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And I put this back on caregivers because a lot of times, and this is hard, it's hard to say because it makes caregivers sound bad, and they're not intentionally doing anything wrong, but you've set yourself up as the authority. You've set yourself up as the barrier. You've set yourself up as the enemy. You've set yourself up as the thing that they have to manage and fight back against.
Yeah.
And the path of least resistance is just to tell you that they're taking it.
Mm-hmm.
And they do. And now every single thing that the doctor does is problematic. The next thing is we have to talk about times. Cody, I got to tell you, here is what people believe. They believe that if you have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, psychosis, major depression, serious and persistent mental illness, that you go to the doctor gives you the pill, you take the pill, and you're fine. The reason people believe this, Cody, is because that's how it's portrayed in pop culture. This scene is in pretty much every movie that has anything to do with mental illness. First, the person starts behaving oddly. Then somebody says, has that person taking their meds? Then that person takes their meds, and then suddenly they're fine. Look, headaches don't work that way.
Yeah.
If we poll a room full of people, they will all come up with different brand names that they like, different dosages they take, different headache remedies work for different people, and that's a headache.
Yeah.
Serious and persistent mental illness is worlds away. I think another thing that we have to address is I don't think anybody understands how psychiatric medications actually work in the real world. Right? In pop culture, this scene plays itself out all the time. The person with the severe and persistent mental illness does something weird. Mm-hmm. The people around them notice something weird and they start to wonder, has that person taken their medicine? And then they do something to get the person to take their medicine, who then takes it, and then that person within almost moments is fine. Listen, that's not the way it works. Hard stop. That's not how headaches work. If you go up to 10 different people and ask them what they take for a headache and how long it takes to work, you're going to get 10 different answers. And that's as simple as a headache. Serious and persistent mental illness is worlds away from over-the-counter headache medication, and we have multiple options for something as simple as a headache. The next thing is, I don't think people realize how long it takes to find the correct medication. It's not simple. First off, let's play a little game. The average medication that is prescribed by a doctor takes about 6 weeks to reach efficacy levels.
Yeah.
Meaning from the day that you are prescribed the medication until the day that you can actually determine whether or not it's working is 6 weeks. Now, many people with severe and persistent mental illness are on multiple medications. The average is about 5, right? So 5 times 6, Cody, is 30. Right? That's 30. They cannot prescribe all 5 at the same time because, first off, if they prescribed all 5 at the same time, they don't know that you need 5.
Yeah.
Right? But even if they did, let's say that you had a problem, which one would they remove? Which one would they adjust? Which one would they raise?
Also, how do you know it's not one affecting the other? And
right,
like some
exactly.
Of them, some
Is
of them
there a
have
drug
issues.
interaction and so on and so forth? So in general, they're prescribed 1 at a time.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 at a time. Again, I'm not trying to, but let's go with the 1 at a time. And you see the doctor every 6 weeks, which is amazing. And you have excellent reporting which again is all things going well, 5 times that's 30. That's over 6 months.
Yeah.
So that means if the doctor gets every single medication right, and you see the doctor exactly 6 weeks on the nose, and you have actual data to mine, and the dosage is perfect, it's going to take 6 months. 6 months to get better. But everybody's like, you saw the doctor a week ago. What the hell? You must not be med compliant. You're not getting any better. Why aren't you improving? As Cody said, 5 to 6 years for him, 4 years for me. These are not unreasonable amounts of time,
No.
but almost every family member, every support system, every police officer, everybody that is related to the mental health care industry seems to believe that every single time a person with serious and persistent mental illness has a problem, it's because they're not taking their medication, and that medication is magic and works instantly.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth. And believing that is going to set you up to be disappointed, but it's going to change how you react to your loved one. If you genuinely believe that the reason that your loved one is sick is self-inflicted because they're not taking their medication, you're going to talk to them like they're doing it to themselves.
Yeah.
And your loved one's going to know that they're doing everything that they can. So they're just going to feel unseen, unheard, talked down to. They're going to feel put upon, and they're not going to want to talk to you anymore.
Yeah.
And this misunderstanding, and that's what it is, Cody, this misunderstanding about how medication works, how it's prescribed, and the amount of time that it takes, I feel starts the vast majority of problems between caregivers, family members, loved ones, and support systems and people with mental illness, because the general belief is that if you are not well, it's your fault because you're not doing what you're told. And we can really expand that out if you'd like. Why are psychiatrists never responsible?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're under a doctor's care and you're not getting better, why do we blame the patient? And I only bring that up not because I'm trying to, piss off psychiatrists, and I'm not trying to piss off caregivers, family members, et cetera. I only bring that up because imagine being sick, you're not getting better, and everybody looks at you like you did something wrong.
Yeah.
That's going to grate on the most mentally, emotionally stable person in the world. To be blamed for your own illness, that cuts, that hurts. And you're already mentally compromised. So it festers and grows into just, it's not even a misunderstanding anymore. It's literally mental illness.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that.
Well, and we've also both had a lot of success with things outside of medication too. I cannot talk enough about peer support, and I know you're the same way. I found a NAMI support group, which for any caregivers who don't know, NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. They have them in most states.
Yeah, every state. Yeah,
every
they're everywhere.
state?
Yeah, they're everywhere.
I know they don't have them in like every city or county, but
Right.
they're trying to make sure they have as much coverage as possible.
And they have a ton of online stuff as well. I think it's super important to point
and they
out.
have, not only do they have peer support groups for the Gabes and Codys of the world, but for the caregivers, they have family support groups too. And so really good resource. And it's not the only resource like that out there. There are other mental health organizations. I've even found, when I was first diagnosed, my wife found that there was online support groups on like Facebook and stuff.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so like there's so many ways now, especially with the internet and technology, there's so many ways that people can start asking for help without having to start with a doctor or even a family member. So it's like that allows people, at least for me, it allowed me to like really understand that maybe I did need help. And I was seeing a lot of parallels between what I was going through and other people. So like peer support was huge for me. I know you talk about it a lot too, but that's just one of them. Like we obviously always talk about medication. I think medication is super important, but there are other things out there as well that can aid in getting a person to be more stable, have a little more insight, and once they get medication and treatment, allow them to really expand on that stability and expand on socializing. And peer support is just one of those things. If you want to talk a little bit about peer support, but any other like things that you recommend, I know exercise is something people recommend a lot. And like, I would never say those things in lieu of medication or treatment, but like as additions, they're excellent, And I think that's the disconnect I always see is people are like, well, do this diet or exercise, and then you won't need medication. I'm like, you can do both of those things, which are great. No one's saying they're not. I don't like that people will try to say that's alone gonna fix someone with mental illness. So peer support was big for me, but also like any healthy habits I started finding were benefiting me in increasing my stability, making me feel like I had more control over my life. And I know you talk about peer support a lot. So.
Yeah, it turns out that people with mental illness are people.
Yeah.
And things that impact people's moods also impact the moods of people with serious and persistent mental illness. The next thing I want to say, Cody, is that medication is important. Nobody's denying that, but it's incomplete.
Yeah.
And could you imagine if we had this in other health spaces? Like, for example, if you broke your leg and we're like, well, you need to set it and get a cast. And that's all we're going to talk about. Nobody's going to teach you how to use crutches. When the cast comes off, you're not going to do through any rehab to learn how to walk, or we're not going to have any follow-up care. Nope, we're just going to set the leg, put it in a cast, and then you're on your own. And if you don't get better, it's your own fault. Because we've done all we can for you, and it's like you don't even appreciate the cast. No, the reason that people who break bones make full recoveries is because they need more than one thing.
Yeah.
You know, just like those examples that I use, they need more than one thing. But yet the medication conversation sucks all of the air out of the room, where people genuinely and honestly believe that medication and medication alone will make people well. And it won't. That's really just a hard stop moment. Peer support, very important. Therapy is very important. Coping skills, very important. Doing all the things that every human has to do. Diet, exercise, other health-related things, very important. All of these things matter. And the example that I really want to use is, let's say that you live with serious and persistent mental illness and you're on the right medications, but you just sit around all day and eat junk food. Yeah, that depression's coming back.
Yeah.
There's not an antidepressant or a medication that can overcome eating nothing but greasy fat and not moving and sitting sedentary in the same place. And people think, well, why not? That would make anybody depressed, and it's an antidepressant. Right. But those medications will work great if you start eating some fruits and vegetables, get a little water, move around a little. And then let's move past the medical community. Let's just move into quality of life.
Yeah.
Everybody. 100% of humans report that they are happier when they have activities, when they have hobbies, when they have goals.
Socialization.
And socializations, friends, when they have things to look forward to. People with severe and persistent mental illness are no different. But what does end up happening is, because medication is the core focus, when people start to feel better, nobody transitions them. Nobody ever says, okay, now you're starting to feel better. Let's talk about getting a job.
Yeah.
Now you're starting to feel better. Let's talk about getting back to school. And if they do, they always talk about it in terms of all or nothing.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, you're feeling better? Go back to work.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you go from being off work for a year because of severe and persistent mental illness, hearing voices, major depression, suicidality, and you've got all the trauma of being committed, and you're on all these medications and your body's working differently, and somebody expects you to go back to work full time, exactly where you left off. That's unreasonable.
Yeah.
You need to find like a part-time job, maybe volunteer first, maybe start off 1 day a week or a 2-hour shift, or maybe the job you had just isn't compatible with what you've learned about your illness.
Yeah.
Assuming, of course, you've taken the time to learn anything about your illness. But so often it's just be med compliant, do what the doctor says, and it'll be magic and you'll be better. False, 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 false.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said was kind of my next talking point. Education, and this conversation is about caregivers. I think education as a patient is so important. Not everyone's going to get to a point where they're as excited to learn about mental illness as Gabe and Cody, right? Like I think we really deep dove into our mental illness. I wanted to better understand schizophrenia. I also was a caregiver, so I was interested for that reason. I cannot stress how much I tell caregivers, learn about the illness.
Yes.
As much as you can. Any book, any video of a person living with it, like any sort of content, learn it. And, take everything, every bit of information, take it all in, figure out what will work best for you and your loved one. But honestly, educating yourself is one of the most effective ways to help them. Just by watching a video like this, you're learning from people who have been there. You're learning from people who have talked to all the doctors, all the psychiatrists. We're not medical professionals, but we've been in the very shoes of some of the people that are, that their family members are reaching out to us. So educating yourself about the illness is, I think, one of the most powerful things that patients, but also caregivers can do. And I know you have a lot on this too, because this is one thing I've heard you say to other people. And if you want to talk a little bit, like this to me is the epitome of why I wanted to do this video, because we get so many people who come to us and they say, I want to help. And I'll ask them basic questions, and I can tell they haven't done any research on what the illness is. And it's so hard to explain to someone how they can help a loved one or a family member if they don't have the basic understanding of what it is they're struggling with. So if you could talk a little more about that, I would love that.
In a way, this reminds me of, you know how they say if you don't know what to do with your child, ask somebody without kids because they know everything? I often find that people, they want to help so desperately, but they don't want to actually learn anything.
Yeah.
They're just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
If it was that simple, I would write a blog and Cody would email it to you and it would be done.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to do
video
any of
wouldn't
this.
even be necessary.
Yeah. Video wouldn't exist. Influencers wouldn't exist. None of this would be, we would just tell you what to do. It's not that simple. It's very, very complex. And looking at it, put on your mom and dad brain, put on your managing toddlers brain. You've got to be nimble. What works on one kid doesn't work on another kid. What works on one age group doesn't work on another age group. Your teenager takes money out of your purse. You're going to react differently than if your 2-year-old takes money out of your purse. And on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I am shocked by the number of people that are like, well, my loved one was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I'm like, how's their mania? And they're like, I don't know what that is. You don't, mania is a hallmark of bipolar disorder. It's depression, hypomania, mania. Like that, those are the big three right there.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I mean, they're just acting crazy. And they always go down to words like that. Like, well, we know what we don't like, and we want them to stop that. Right, but do you understand why they're behaving that way? Do you understand the disease process? Do you even understand why they were diagnosed? And if the answer to these questions is no, you've got to ask yourself, are you the best person to help them? And you should really consider that the answer is no.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
And that's okay, too.
Right, that is
people
okay.
People need to be okay with that.
Yeah, but learn.
Yeah.
And what's... I don't want to say it's sad, Cody, but you know that joke, we have the entire expanse of human knowledge on a phone in our pocket and we use it to watch cat videos and argue with strangers on the internet?
Yeah.
Nothing rings more true than when I talk to a lot of family members, friends, etc., and I consider the amount that they could have that they haven't looked up yet. And I'm not saying any of this. First off, the people watching this video, we're sort of preaching to the choir because they're agreeing to watch the video.
Yeah.
But watch more than one video.
Yeah.
Read more than one blog. In fact, find some people you disagree with. Try some things that didn't work and then learn about it.
Yeah.
You really have to approach this as the giant problem that it is and know that it's not a step 1 leads to step 2 leads to step 3 problem. This is a nebulous quagmire mess where you're going to make the best decision in the moment and then move on to the next one. Identically to parenting.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do the wrong thing. But if you've got a net positive, if you make the right decision more often than you make the wrong one, you can really be impactful. And that's what the information really leads people to believe to. And then I do want to follow it up with, you got to take care of yourself as well.
Oh, yeah. So actually the last portion of this, a lot of this I know sounds very intimidating, very scary. We're telling people, hey, there's going to be issues. There's going to be problems. You're going to make mistakes. Your loved one might resist your help. All of this is intimidating. It's scary.
Cody's nicer. I said will resist your help. I just want to go on record as saying if you're watching this, your loved one will resist your help.
And that's the truth. But all of this, the point I'm trying to make is that all of this can be very intimidating for a caregiver, especially someone who their loved one just started experiencing mental health or mental illness. And so it's very important to me that we end this on some positive notes. And so one of the things I always try to communicate is I've seen both as a caregiver and as someone living with mental illness that even though I resisted or my mom resisted care, I am so grateful now for the people who I thought were out to get me. And so that I just want to remind people that even in the moment, if you feel like you're losing the person that you love or they don't care about you anymore, they're unwell, they need help, and the effort you're putting in is not for nothing. You are doing more than some parents or some family members ever do. And that's so crucial because if you don't advocate for them, they might not be in a place to do it themselves, which means no one will. And so I just want to put that message out there that like you are making a difference. It's not easy. And all of this stuff we said is very true. And I hate that we always have to start. When people come up to me after conferences and ask me, how do I help a loved one? My answer is, you're not going to like my answer.
Yeah, they're not.
That sucks.
It's a terrible answer.
And it's a horrible answer to have to give because as much as they want to help their loved one, I want to help them help their loved one. And so realizing that, one, it is important to recognize that everything we've talked about is unfortunately, an experience that we've both seen firsthand. And it is the sad truth of helping someone with mental illness. It's not a over the night fix. It's not an easy job, but it is important. And to what Gabe said, and I'll let you talk more on this, take care of yourself as a caregiver. You cannot pour from an empty cup. It's such an old saying, and I talk about it in a lot of different ways, even being like an advocate, I talk about it. But even as a caregiver, that's so true. Like, you can't take care of your loved one if you're not taking care of yourself. And I'll let you talk more about like how caregivers can really strive to do that, because that's such an important part of this conversation. And we both see it. Caregivers will come to us broken and just so upset, and they think they've tried everything and they don't know where to go. They have done some research and not having any success. How can they really work to take care of themselves while still taking care of someone who may be going through some of the most difficult periods of their life?
There's so much to say about things like this. First, a lot of caregivers are parents, and we need to acknowledge this.
Yeah.
Or they are grandparents or, close family members, and they feel like if they take any time off, they're not advocating for their loved one. And the first thing that I want to say, and this is a hard stop moment, self-care is advocacy.
Yes.
If you are taking care of yourself, you are making sure that you are available for them.
Yep.
If you are not taking care of yourself, you may not be available when they need you, or you may not be at your best. And Cody, I want to give everybody an analogy that I think they can understand, right? If your house catches on fire and you call the fire department, do you want the firefighter to show up who says, I am the best firefighter, I'm the only one that knows how to do this, I've been up for a week straight and I fight all the fires and I can do it? Is that the person that you want to save your loved one and to save your house? Or do you want the person who shows up and says, I've been off the last 3 days, I sleep every night, and I only work a 24-hour shift before I get a 3-day break because I need to be 100% fresh to make sure that I can make it up the steps to get into the room to save your child, dog, cat, photographs, television, whatever. Everybody wants the rested, well-adjusted firefighter.
Yeah.
Your loved one needs the rested, well-adjusted loved one to advocate for them, not the burnout, broken, stressed out, at their wits' end, can't tell up from down. And the next thing I want to say that builds on this is there's also a modeling of the way, right? So many people come to me and they're like, how do I get my loved one to take care of their mental health? And I'm like, you're not taking care of your mental health. And like, my mental health isn't that bad, right? But it is bad and you're not doing anything about it. You're not going to therapy. You're not seeing a doctor. You're not going to a peer support group. You're not doing hobbies. You're not focusing on improving your situation, but you're actively angry and resentful and sad and every other emotion that you can fit in that describes the people who we are talking to, that their loved ones aren't doing it. Mm-hmm. But you're not.
Yeah.
There is a modeling the way that's very, very helpful. And finally, Cody, because I want to end on a high as well. My parents did everything wrong. I cannot be more clear. They if there was a mistake door for them to run into, they ran into it with glee. They made so many mistakes. But when I got well and when I reached recovery, I slowly realized that in order to make mistakes, you have to be trying.
Yeah.
In order to make mistakes, you have to be present. And in order to be present, you can't abandon your child. And this fixed pretty much everything my parents ever did. I'm not pleased by the mistakes that they made because that's not a thing to be happy about. But my God, they would have made zero mistakes if they would have just left me to my own devices. Yep. If they would have just abandoned me and told me to fend for myself, they would have made, I guess, one mistake. They abandoned me, but I wouldn't have hundreds of examples. And this meant a lot to me. So, unfortunately, sometimes you've got to lose the battle to win the war. You've got to set some things aside. You've got to set some hard boundaries, and you've got to do some uncomfortable things, knowing that if you do those things right, you can get to a place where you can start to repair those relationships. And maybe with a little age, time, perspective, your loved one will be like, yeah, you were in a really bad position as well. And for me, and I can only speak for myself, I realized that it was my illness that put them there. So it wasn't actually them that made the mistake as much as my illness impacted them in such a way to leave them vulnerable. Different from me, but vulnerable nonetheless. And that's one of the complicated things about mental illness that doesn't get discussed as much as it should. It doesn't just impact the person, it impacts people. It impacts loved ones. It impacts society. It impacts workplaces. It impacts everyone. And those who are involved in it, they deserve our respect. And I do believe that when people reach the Gabe and Cody level, we do reflect back on it and realize that, and we become extraordinarily thankful for your sacrifice.
Absolutely. I want to thank everyone for watching this video. This has been a project we've been talking about forever, and I would love to do a follow-up to this because I know there's probably questions we didn't get to answer, even though I feel like we're on an hour of filming here, and there's going to be a lot of good content in here, but I know you guys are still going to have questions. So please let me know down in the comments what kind of questions you have. It can be about a specific mental illness. It can be about caregiving, whatever it is, we want to help the best we can. And that's why we did this. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow Gabe, Ask a Bipolar on Instagram and TikTok. Check out his book, Mental Illness is an Asshole. One of my favorite books of all time. And I'm not just saying that because he's sitting here in front of me and he's bigger than me. I genuinely, I love the insights in here. It's such a good read. So make sure you guys check that out. And GabeHoward.com, you can buy that book and check out all the amazing work he's doing. Thank you so much, Gabe, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it easy, guys.